How are y'all doing this evening? So in a previous video we checked the battery and found it was bad, and we went ahead and replaced it. And after we replaced it, we also checked the alternator at the time the car wouldn't start, and it's bad too. So we've got our new battery already installed in the previous video. This time around we're going to go ahead and replace this alternator, which this car is a 2011 Toyota RAV4. We've owned it since it was brand new, and it's never had an alternator put in it. It's had a couple of belts and belt tensioners over the years, but never an alternator. So it's got about 250,000 miles on it, so it's probably due an alternator. It's no big deal. So one thing I know from changing belts is sometimes this belt can be hard to get on. You can see, well, you can see a little piece of it right there, but the rest of it, can't really see it. So what you want to do when you get ready to start working on it, cut your wheels all the way to the passenger side. And that way you can take that plastic panel off and you can get to the bottom pulleys without having to do a whole lot less. Now you could jack the car up and take the wheel off, and that would make it even easier, but I like to, I can lay on my creeper and roll under there and it's no problem. If we got to do it. Sometimes you can get it to loop on there. It just depends on the belt. So what we've got a brand new alternator, new belt, and a new belt tensioner. These Toyotas, for some reason, the belt tensioners don't last. You pretty much got to replace it every time you replace the belt. And I figured since I got to take the belt off to replace the alternator, there's no sense in not replacing it. So step one. Now, if some people, and I've seen other videos where they drain the radiator and take this tank off. You don't need to do that. And I'll show you what to do, but you can take these push pins out just so that this panel is loose so you can get to the bolt, and I'll show you what we're going to do. The first step though is going to be disconnecting this battery. That takes a 10mm wrench. It's kind of a piece of cake. You just loosen it, pop that off of there and set it off where it won't get back on there. So now you don't have to worry about anything sparking. So the next step, we're going to take these plastic pins out. Now if you've got the factory ones in here still, they'll have the pin in the center that you push in, but I have been doing all the maintenance work on this car for years, and I have had to replace all those pins because they dry rot over time and they get bad, and then you got to replace them. It's always a good idea to have a set of the plastic pins in the box that you can get from the parts store, because you'll need them eventually. So you take 3 or 4 of those off, then you can pick this up like that, and you can get to the bolt underneath there. That's it's a 10mm bolt. Make sure you can see that. It's right under there, right there. So we're going to take that off first. That thing is some old kind of tight. Just pull that one off. Should have had my coffee can out here already. And then there's another bolt right back here, right down there, underneath there. So we'll need an extension to get to that one. now what you can do is pull this tank up and just kind of set it out of the way. Just like that. Now if you're doing this on a hot engine, you don't want to set it on that exhaust, but this engine's not hot, so I don't have to really worry about that too much. Yep. All right. So the first step is going to be removing the belt, and let me see if I can get the camera down in there. Flashlight. So you can see the tensioner is right here for the belt, and you need a 14mm socket to get on that to take the tension off. It's spring loaded, so and once you take the tension off, then you can slip the belt over the pulley on the alternator and then let the tension back off, and it's going to trap my wrench. They always do that for some reason. I don't have one of those fancy special wrenches for it, but that's okay. It can sit there for now. It's not hurting anything. Let's go ahead and take the bolt out of the adjust the tensioner, since we're replacing it anyways. It. It's got one bolt in it. It's 12mm wrench. It's got a locating pin. When you go to put it back on, the pin's got to get in its hole. But we'll set that to the side because we don't need it, but we need to save the bolt. Alright, now that you got that out, we can pull the belt out because we're going to be replacing it, and it gets stuck on everything down under this car. This belt's not bad at all, but I'm already here and I'm already doing this, so I don't see any reason not to change it. We got to take it off to change the alternator anyways. So once you get that done, can lay this temporarily back over this way. We got a couple of bolts we need to take loose on this wiring harness down here. They're 10mm. So right here on the top of the alternator, there's a little 10mm bolt that's holding a clamp. Pull it out. You can just leave the clamp attached to the wiring harness. And then there's one right here on this little bracket that's also attached to the wiring harness, but my plastic clip is broken, so I'll be replacing that when we put it back in. But you want to get that bracket out of the way. It's just a little sheet metal bracket with a bolt in it. So we got those out. Now you got two connections on the alternator. So I'll show you on this new one what I'm going to be doing here, because it'll be hard for you to see with my hand in the way. You got a plug that you got to squeeze the clips on, and then you got one nut here that's a 10 millimeter. It's covered by a plastic cover. You got to pop it up off of there. So let's do that. Yep, there's that. All right, so your wiring harness is all loose from the alternator. So now all that's holding it in is two 14 millimeter bolts. So one of them is here. That's right here on the new one, goes through. And the other one is down on the bottom. And you can't really see it from up here. You got to feel it with your hand. So let me get those two out. So this is what I'm using to get to the bottom socket. The problem is you need length to get to it, but if you use a deep well socket, your ratchet will get trapped against the frame rail. It's not in a very easy spot, so to speak. Twist around like a contortionist and you can get your hand down in there. Unscrew it the rest of the way. So there's the bottom bolt. So now this should be loose. And what'll happen is that top part, yeah, it's loose. The top part's tight on there because it's got a bushing that presses against there. So once you get it loose, then you can take a pry bar or a big screwdriver and pry it forward off of its mount ears. Just be careful what you're prying on below it. Once you get it off the ears, then you can just ease it right up through here like this. You'll have to jiggle stuff around to get it around it. There we go. Just like that. So there's our original factory alternator. The bearings are still good in it, but it does not charge. So we'll set it off to the side. And now we're ready to start putting our new alternator back in. Now the reason that that thing is so tight when you pull it out is you've got this bushing right here. It's threaded. So when you put the bolt through and start tightening it, that bushing moves in this ear. Make sure you can see that. That bushing moves in this ear. It slides in as you tighten it. And that's it captures that on that bracket. So when you go to put it back in, you want to set it in there and start the top bolt, but just get it started and leave it loose, just hand tight, and then get your bottom bolt in before you tighten anything. Because if you tighten that top bolt before you get your bottom bolt in, then you can't move it real easy. You can't move it around to get your bolt started. So you always want to get all your bolts started before you tighten anything up. So now we'll just finagle this thing down into its hole. Okay, I'm going to try to get this, and you can see what I'm pointing at here. Let me get this extension. So that tensioner, the bolt goes in here, and then right above that there's a hole, and that hole is where that pin right there goes. It's a locating pin, so you got to get that pin in and get the bolt in the hole and tighten it down. That's the easy part. So there it is, it's back installed. And y'all had to pardon me with my camera skills. It's very difficult to actually do work and take video at the same time. So now we got to put our belt back on. So I'm going to attempt to do it without having to drop that panel I showed you earlier. But if you have too much trouble, just go ahead and drop the panel. But sometimes you can finagle it on here. I printed this off of the internet, and you can kind of see how the belt goes. You got your crankshaft, your AC compressor, your water pump, and then your alternator, and then the tensioner puts pressure on it right here. So basically the easiest way to do it is if you can get the belt over everything but the water pump, and then you've got to try to, the water pump doesn't have a ridge on it. See, like this, see how this pulley has the ridge here? You got to get it loose enough to get the pulley over that, but the water pump doesn't have a ridge, it's smooth. So it's the easiest place to get the belt back on. It all depends on if the belt will cooperate with you. And new belts sometimes they just don't. So let me see if I can get this looped down through here and where it needs to be without having a too much trouble. So once you get that cover off, then you can get in there to the crank pulley and the AC pulley and get the belt started on them. Okay, it occurs to me, I just remembered something. So this is sitting on the side of the engine like that. And you still have an alternate piece down here at the bottom that you can use. So now that I think about it, I think this is how I got the belt on the last one. Because this belt, it's a real simple belt, but the problem is there's just absolutely no room to get your hand up in here. So, believe it or not, what I'm doing, I'm pushing that wrench backwards and then reaching up here at the same time and getting this belt. I don't know if you can even see it. See the belt's almost onto the pulley there. The problem is if you use the top nut, if you don't have one of those special funky tools that bends all sort of ways to set it up, then you can't really get a good twist on it. So what I'm doing is I've got the wrench on the bottom where you've got more play, so I'm reaching down with one hand and pulling it to loosen the tension, and then trying to get this belt pushed onto the pulley with the other. There we go. I think that's on now. Yes, that got it. So there we go. Yeah, all I can say is thanks a lot, Toyota engineers. See how much room they give you to mess with there? You can't even get your hand in there. It's ridiculous. No sense in it. That's bad engineering. But now we can get this cover put back on down here. So let me do that, and then I'll get back with you. Okay. I got the cover back on down there. So now all we've got left is to go ahead and reinstall the coolant tank where it goes. Put this plastic cover back on, and then we'll crank it up and check and make sure everything is good to go. So we just start our bolts back in this thing. You don't want to tighten these too tight because you don't want to mash that plastic up, especially as old as this thing is, that plastic starts to dry rot, and that's what happens with all these little push pin things too. That's why you got to keep buying new ones. But that is the cost of not having a car payment. So we stick all our little pins back in. Then we've got to reconnect our battery. Tighten it down. And make sure the camera is not going to go anywhere here when I crank this up. Don't want to lose my camera. Alright, we'll crank it up and see what she reads. Alright, so the battery light is out, which is a good thing. .7 volts, so we should be good to go now. Alright, well, hopefully that video will help y'all out if you ever go to do this. It's not an especially hard job, but the belt is the biggest the belt's the biggest pain. And probably if you weren't replacing it, if you were just keeping the old belt and you just took it off the alternator and right back on it, it probably wouldn't be that big a deal. But or if you had small hands. My hands are pretty big, so I have a hard time getting down in there and getting everything in there. But once you figure out you can take that plastic piece off down at the bottom, it does make it a lot easier. And it's my fault because I figured out the last time I put a belt and tensioner on this to do the tension at the bottom, which is easier, but I forgot about it. I work on so many cars, so no biggie. Got it done. Everything's good to go. My daughter will be happy, the wife will be happy. So appreciate y'all watching. Hopefully this helped y'all out, and y'all have a good one.